In the quiet town of Ashton, nestled among rolling hills and dense forests, life seems almost idyllic. The people go about their daily routines, exchanging warm greetings on Main Street, attending church on Sundays, and gathering at the local diner for coffee and conversation. Yet, beneath this peaceful surface, an invisible battle is raging. A conflict between forces of light and darkness, good and evil, that threatens not only the town but the very souls of its inhabitants. It begins subtly, with whispers in the night and shadows that linger just a moment too long. Strange occurrences unsettle the townsfolk. A sudden chill in the air, a sense of being watched, unexplained accidents and misunderstandings that escalate into bitter arguments. Most dismiss these as coincidences, but a few, more sensitive to the unseen, sense a deeper disturbance.
So, welcome to This Present Darkness by Frank Peretti, where in a small town of Ashton, people have no idea there is a battle raging.
The moon was full this Sunday night. Two figures dressed in work clothes suddenly appeared on Highway 27, outside the small college town of Ashton. They were at least 7 feet tall, strongly built, and perfectly proportioned. One is dark-haired with sharp features, and the other is blonde and powerful. A half-mile away, they looked toward this town. They started walking, while taking in cacophonic sounds of gaiety from the storefronts, streets, and alleys. Students would soon be getting their long-awaited summer break. Most would be going home, but not before the festivities. They will enjoy the street discos, the carnival rides, nickel movies, and more. It was a chance to get drunk, pregnant, beat up, ripped off, and sick all in one night. The two visitors stood tall and silent, wondering how a small town of 12,000 people, including college students, could produce such a vast, teeming crowd. The usually quiet population had turned out in groves augmented by diversion seekers from elsewhere. Until the streets, taverns, stores, alleys, and parking lots were jammed. Anything was allowed and the illegal was ignored. The police had their hands full. With each rowdy, vandal, drunk, or hooker in handcuffs only meant there were a dozen more, loose and roaming about the town. The two visitors made their way through the people-packed carnival. They were inquisitive about this town. The two men kept eyeing the crowd. They were looking for someone. There, said the dark-haired man, pointing. They both saw her. She was young, very pretty. She was very unsettled, looking this way and that way, a camera in her hands, and a stiff-lipped depression on her face. The two men rushed and stood beside her. She did not notice them. You know, the dark-haired man said you might try looking over there. He then guided her by a gentle hand on her shoulder. She stepped through the grass, moving towards the booth where teenagers were egging each other. None of this interested her, but then, some shadows moving stealthily behind the booth did. She held her camera ready, took a few more silent, careful steps, and then slowly raised her camera to her eye. The flash of the bulb lit up the trees behind the booth, as the two men hurried away to their next appointment. The two visitors moved smoothly, unfaltering, passing through the main part of town at a brisk pace. In no time at all, they stood before a little white church. They looked back. From this lofty hill, one could look over the whole town and see it spread from city limit to city limit. You can see the college campus, the main street, the storefronts, offices, several small family businesses, and the newspaper. From here, the town looked small, innocent, and harmless. The two visitors did not perceive things with their eyes only. This small town weighed heavily upon their spirits and minds. They could feel it restless, strong, growing, very designed and purposeful, a very special kind of evil. It is not unlike either of them to ask questions, to study, to probe. More often they just come and do their job. So they naturally, pausing to wonder, why here? Suddenly they both instantly vanish around the corner of the church, melding themselves against the beveled siding, almost invisible in the dark. They didn't speak, they didn't move, but they watched, with a piercing gaze, as something approached. As the tree stirred in the wind, one creature cast one shadow, not dancing in the wind as did the trees. Neither did it stand still as did the shadow of the buildings. No, the creature it crawled, quivered, moving along the street toward the small church. Any light it crossed never lit it. It seemed to sink into its own darkness, as if it were a breach torn in space. But this creature had a shape, an animated, creature-like shape, and as it neared the church, faint sounds could be heard, the scratching of claws along the ground. It had arms, it had legs, but it seemed to move without them. It slowly crossed the streets and mounted the front steps of the church. Its leering bulbous eyes reflected the stark blue light of the full moon, with their own jaundiced glow. A gnarled head protruded from hunched shoulders, and wisps of rancid red breath seethed in labored hisses through rows of jagged fangs. It either laughed or coughed, the wheezes puffing out from deep within its throat. From its crawling posture it reared up on its legs and looked about the quiet neighborhood, the black leathery jowls pulling back into a hideous death mask. Grin. Shadows gathered thickly around the ancient church, the air heavy with an unnatural chill. As the unearthly creature pressed itself forward, intent on breaching the sacred space, a sudden radiance erupted from within. The light was brilliant, pure, an impenetrable wall that surged outward in a wave of divine power. The creature recoiled instantly, howling in frustration and pain, its dark form dissolving in the presence of something far greater than itself. The battle was far from over. There was an explosion of suffocating vapor as the fictional leather-hairy creature tried to enter the closed door again. This time it had wings that hummed as it banked sharply in a flying, then headed for the door. There was an explosion of suffocating vapor. After a pause, the dark-haired, handsome man appeared. He was standing in the church foyer, 7 feet tall and muscular. He stood replacing his shiny sword in its sheath. Slowly, the light that surrounded him faded. A spirit of harassment, he asked, doubt, of fear, and there are many more than we. They are everywhere and never idle. But what are they doing here? He looked through the foyer doors towards the sanctuary and said, "Let's see this man of God." The dark-haired walked with a strongly built blonde-haired man through the church's small foyer. On one side of the wall, Yuo could see the bulletin board with requests for groceries for a needy family, some babysitting, and prayer for a sick missionary. On the other side of the wall, the record of the weekly offerings. The offering was lower than last week, and so was the attendance. They entered the church. Down the short, narrow aisle they went, past the orderly ranks of dark-stained plank and slat pews, towards the front of the sanctuary, where one small spotlight illumined a rustic 2x4 cross hanging above the baptistry. In the center of the worn, carpeted platform stood the little sacred desk, the pulpit, with a Bible laid open upon it. These were humble furnishings, functional but not at all elaborate, revealing humility on the part of the people or neglect. The first sound was the soft, muffled sobbing from the end of the right pew. There, kneeling in earnest prayer, his head resting on the hard wooden bench, was a young, very young man, with his hands clenched with fervency. The blond man thought to himself as he looked at, young and vulnerable. The young man's face now showed pain, grief, and love. His lips moved without a sound as names, petitions, and praises poured forth with passion and tears. The two men sound not help, but stand there for a moment, watching, studying, pondering. "The little warrior," said the dark-haired man. The big blond man formed the words himself in silence, looking down at the contrite man in prayer. "Yes," they observed. "Yes, this in the one. He's interceding, standing before the Lord for the sake of the people and this town. Almost every night he is here. The man smiled and said, "He is not so insignificant. But he is only one. He's alone. There are others. They just have to be found. For now, his single, vigilant prayer is the beginning. He is going to be hurt. You know that. And so will the newspaper man. And so will we. But will we win?" The big blond man's eyes seemed to have burned with rekindled fire. "We will fight. We will fight," his friend said. Then they stood over the kneeling pastor on either side, and at the moment, little by little, white light filled the room. It illuminated the cross on the back wall, slowly brought out colors on every plank of every pew. The walls glimmered, the worn rugs glowed, and little Puplet stood tall and stark as a sentinel backlit by the sun. Now the two men were brilliantly white, the forms transfigured by garments that seemed to burn with intensity. They placed their hands upon the shoulders of the young man, and then, gracefully, shimmering, nearly transparent membranes began to unfurl from their backs and shoulders, and rise to meet and overlap above their heads, gently undulating in a spiritual wind.
A gripping tale is about to unfold as ordinary lives conceal supernatural battle. Unseen forces wage war against the hearts and the minds of the townspeople, and few unsuspecting individuals sense that something isn't right. Welcome once again to This Present Darkness by Frank Peretti. The story continues.
As journalist Marshall Hogan and Pastor Hank Bush investigate mysterious happenings, their courage and faith are tested. Through spiritual warfare and unwavering conviction, they confront evil and discover the power of prayer against darkness. The newspaper came out only twice a week in Ashton. That was Tuesdays and Fridays. By the appearance of the office and the layout of the facilities, you could tell it was a low-budget operation. In the front half of the building was the office and newsroom area. It had 3 desks, 2 typewriters, 2 telephones, 2 water baskets, scattered notes and papers, an old, worn-out counter, a reception area, and a small bell that jingles whenever someone enters. Behind the maze of this small-scale activity was one luxury that looked too little big town for this place: a glassed-in office for the editor. It was a new addition for the editor/owner, who was a former big city reporter, and having a glassed-in editor's office had been one of his life's dreams. This new fellow was Marshall Hogan, named a strong, big-framed hustler from Ashton. He had returned home and bought the paper a few months ago, and the clash between his big city polish and their small-town easy-go still roused some confrontations from time to time. The transition from the New York Times to the Ashton Clarion, the conflict was real. Marshall looked at the printed pages of the newspaper. Sheets were on the floor everywhere. Page 3, 4, 5, 7. What about 1 and 2? All right, Marshall, said Tom. What are we to do with all these empty slots? We are going to put in Bernie's coverage of the festival with clever writing, human interest photos, the whole bit as soon as she gets here. Suddenly the phone rang. At Good Morning the Clarion. His wife answered the phone. It was Bernice Edie who answered the phone. She was rumbling on, sounding hysterical, speaking in one breath. Where is she? Marshall asks. Edie listened, her face filled with horror. Yes, well, clam down now. Sure. Well, don't worry, we'll get you out. Marshall spouted at, well, where the heck is she? Edney gave him a coding look and answered, in jail.